Our story begins on Naboo as Anakin Skywalker and Chancellor Palpatine are walking through the halls of a royal palace. Over the last handful of days, Jedi Master Obi-Wan Kenobi went undercover as a bounty hunter called Rako Hardeen in order to infiltrate Dooku's inner circle and foil an assassination plot against the Chancellor. In the end, it all worked out. Palpatine was safe, Obi-Wan was alive, the other bounty hunters were arrested. Everything seemed to be fine, but as the two of them walked the halls, Palpatine admitted that he was impressed by the lengths the Jedi will go to in this war. He turned to Anakin, saying he assumes the plan to fake Obi-Wan's death and disguise him was his idea. Anakin tensed up, bordering on anger and frustration, and he said that he was actually in the dark about the plan, just like Palpatine. Palpatine said this was interesting. He thought the Jedi always worked as a team and trusted each other, that he and Master Kenobi were like brothers. Anakin was frustrated, but before he could admit it, the door to the banquet hall opened up, and sitting in the far chair was Count Dooku himself. He was here to finish the job and assassinate Palpatine, Anakin realized. Anakin told Dooku he should have left when he was still alive, and Dooku told Anakin that fighting him alone will be an easy task. Both warriors ignited their blades, and Anakin flipped across the table, striking hard at Dooku, as Dooku used one hand to block the strikes. This fake effortlessness always irritated Anakin, and the two of them dueled through the room, blades clashing constantly, until Dooku managed to find an opening, pushing Anakin back towards the wall. Dooku began throwing chairs at Anakin, and when that didn't work, he threw trays, plates, forks with the Force. Anakin cut through them all, and a pair of forks pierced his mechanical hand, reminding Anakin of what Dooku took from him on Geonosis. Anakin angrily spun his blade, then leapt at Dooku, aiming a stab for his heart. Dooku pulled a chair in front of himself, and Anakin stabbed into it. Anakin pushed hard. The blue blade was nearly an inch from Dooku's eyes. As the two of them passed Palpatine, the Chancellor's smile only grew, as he saw just how powerful Anakin had really become. Dooku was forced to retreat, backing up through the hallway as Anakin's speed and ferocity began to overwhelm him. Anakin kicked Dooku into the stairs, then slammed his blade onto Dooku's blade until Dooku's hand slipped, and Anakin cut right through it before calling the red blade into his open hand to form a cross across Dooku's neck. The two of them stared at each other for a long second. Palpatine watched from the doorway. He was about to tell Anakin to arrest him, but Anakin saw Dooku lift his other hand to fire lightning, thinking Anakin would never actually kill him. And Anakin made his choice. He snipped the blades across Dooku's neck, and Dooku's head rolled to the floor. Palpatine stood in complete shock, and from the other hallway, Obi-Wan had just entered to see this as well. He ran up to Anakin, and he could feel his anger. Obi-Wan put a hand on Anakin's shoulder, as Anakin just said that he couldn't stop himself. Palpatine closed his eyes for a moment, cursing Dooku for being so weak, and he then told the Jedi that they should get going. Anakin took one last look at the headless body of Dooku, and his emotions were beyond conflicted about what he just did. When they returned to Coruscant, Anakin and Obi-Wan would stand before the council. Anakin's gaze seemed distant, jaw clenched, fingers twitching as if still holding the hilts of the lightsabers that ended Dooku's life. Obi-Wan spoke first to say that the mission was a success. The Chancellor was unharmed, but as many of them know, Dooku is now dead. Anakin was forced to kill Dooku. Windu leaned forward, voice skeptical, as he asked what he meant by forced. Anakin didn't wait for Obi-Wan to explain. He told the council that he had Dooku at his mercy, and Dooku was about to fire lightning at him. If he let that happen, Palpatine would have been in immediate danger. He said he did what he had to do, and Windu nodded slowly. It wasn't that the council didn't want Dooku defeated, but Obi-Wan's initial report of a darkness surrounding Anakin, of course, had them on edge. Yoda spoke now, voice soft, as he said that this may not end the war, but the balance will certainly be shifted, and he told Anakin that the council trusts his judgment on this. He did what he had to do to keep the Chancellor safe. Elsewhere, in his office overlooking the city of Coruscant, Palpatine stared out the windows as he contemplated the unplanned fracture in his grand plan. Dooku was supposed to die, but not yet. Not before the war had frayed the Republic to the brink of collapse. He would have to accelerate his plan, perhaps turn to General Grievous as the new face of the war. But Grievous didn't have nearly the same charisma as Dooku. He was a monster. And Maul, well, Maul was a wild card. He wouldn't work much either. He was dangerous, unstable, but so was Grievous. What mattered now was keeping Anakin close. Palpatine realized this was not all a loss. If Dooku's murder had stirred something in Anakin, anything like guilt, fear, or power, he could use that soon. And perhaps it was time to turn the Separatists into a far more powerful army, with Grievous at the head of all of it. Across the galaxy, the Separatist movement was in chaos. Without Dooku, the CIS did begin to splinter. On planets like Raxus and Seleucami, local governors were questioning their loyalty to the cause without their leader. Some worlds attempted negotiations with the Republic, sensing that the tide may be turning. Others would double down on defense, giving more power to Grievous and his droids. But even Grievous could recognize this was a loss, and what would follow was chaos, infighting among Separatist leaders, mistrust in battle strategy, and a growing paranoia that they were all going to be executed just like Dooku. On Coruscant, the public hailed Anakin as a hero. News outlets across the HoloNet plastered his image beside Palpatine's in triumphant broadcasts, saying that the hero without fear ends the Separatist mastermind. The Jedi Council, however, was less celebratory. Behind closed doors, they questioned if these celebrations were coming too soon, and they debated whether Anakin's judgment had been clouded. Obi-Wan defended him fiercely, insisting that without Anakin, the Chancellor may not have survived. But even Obi-Wan knew. He saw it in Anakin's eyes. The way he didn't stop himself. That moment haunted them both. And as for Anakin, something had shifted deep within him. He'd acted in the heat of battle, but there was a part of him that had wanted to kill Dooku, to prove once and for all that he was strong enough. And now, alone in his quarters, he stared down at his gloved, mechanical hand. Dooku cut off this hand, and Dooku would always be a part of him now, both physically and mentally. But Anakin would soon speak to his wife, Padme, as both of them dared to say that the war may soon be coming to an end. Padme was drawing up peace accords in the Senate, and the two of them were excited to finally be together without war. But, unfortunately, the death of Count Dooku did not bring the war to a close. With the head of the CIS severed, the body was fighting back. The remaining leaders turned to General Grievous. Grievous was not a strategist or a visionary like Dooku. He was a warrior, a monster. And now, under secret orders from Sidious, that warrior was given permission to do whatever he deems necessary to bring the Republic down. Grievous was granted access to a massive, untouched reserve fleet, hidden vessels once meant for an emergency situation where Sidious would need the Republic wiped out. Now, they were used in this situation without Dooku, spreading across the Outer Rim. Worlds that had considered returning to the Republic were made examples of. As the wealthy citizens of Coruscant celebrated Dooku's death with banquets and parties, entire city blocks were scorched to ash with orbital fire in the Outer Rim. On Duro, Grievous led a personal assault, marching with Magni Guards into the civilian sectors, executing leaders who refused to pledge loyalty back to the Separatists. On Onderon, Republic reinforcements arrived late, finding smoldering ruins, and Grievous had scorched many, many planets. The war became savage and chaotic. Clone legions found themselves in battles they could barely comprehend. Ambushes were turning into week-long sieges, planetary invasions without any real endgame. The Jedi moved from world to world, but Grievous was always one step ahead of them. Grievous was speaking directly to Sidious much more often. His fleets would jump unpredictably, targeting supply chains, hospitals, refugee convoys that seemed impossible for the Separatists to locate. Grievous had someone working with him from the inside, and this brutality wasn't even about winning territory. It was psychological, a galaxy-wide message that Dooku may have died, but the Separatists were more dangerous now. Within the Separatist Senate, dissent was growing quickly. Senators like Avi Sang pleaded for negotiations, but they were never heard. Some wished to withdraw from the war, to sue for peace, but whispers of accidents and mysterious disappearances of Separatist leaders searching for peace would stop any chance of this open resistance. The banking clan, Techno Union, and other corporate entities saw only profit in this, so they helped Dooku with whatever he needed. On Coruscant, the Jedi were growing wary. Their numbers thinned as more knights fell, but finally they would catch a break. Above Oba Diah, the Jedi intercepted a mysterious signal, an emergency beacon from a vessel long believed lost. It was a Jedi scout ship belonging to Jedi Master Sifo-Dyas, the same Jedi that the Kaminoans claimed created the clone army. The Council knew that this may be the lead they'd been waiting for, but they had to do this the right way. Something was off about the entire situation with Sifo-Dyas, and it was no secret that he was best friends with Dooku before Dooku's fall to the dark side. The Jedi long wondered if there was more than meets the eye with the clone army. but they also knew that this mysterious Darth Sidious seemed to be one step ahead of them for this entire war. So the Jedi would try to lay a trap. Yoda would inform Chancellor Palpatine that Obi-Wan Kenobi was going alone to Oba Diah to investigate this crashed ship from Sifo-Dyas, as it may give them the answers they need about the Sith. Yoda did this while all of Palpatine's closest advisors were within earshot, as the Council had begun to suspect that Sidious truly did infiltrate the Republic government, just like Dooku told Obi-Wan on Geonosis before the first battle. Palpatine would hear this from Yoda, and he would immediately know just how dangerous this was for his entire plan. If Dooku were alive, he would send him to deal with this, but instead, Sidious was now going to be sending General Grievous to Oba Diah to assassinate Kenobi and destroy all evidence tying the clone army creation back to the Sith. Sidious knew the Pikes of Oba Diah were smart. They likely kept evidence as leverage, and now they would have to pay with their lives. So, many hours later, General Grievous would discreetly fly his personal ship into the lower levels of Oba Diah. He was annoyed that he had to come and do this himself, as there were many battles spread across the galaxy that he would rather be helping with. But he composed himself by remembering that today, he gets to kill Obi-Wan Kenobi. Grievous moved through the lower levels until he came upon the room where he was ordered to kill Kenobi. It was a cell where Sifo-Dyas' former aide, Silman, was supposed to be held. Grievous opened the door, readying himself for a duel, but there was no one inside. Grievous cautiously entered, growling with confusion and anger before he heard 6 lightsabers ignite behind him. This was a trap. The Jedi were right. Whatever they do, the Sith and Grievous seemed to be right there with them. Grievous turned to see Obi-Wan Kenobi, Anakin Skywalker, Ahsoka Tano, and Plo Koon. Grievous was trapped, but he had battle droids and Magna Guards waiting in his ship below, and he pushed a button on his wrist to activate them. Obi-Wan turned quickly, deflecting a volley of droid blaster fire while leaping for cover. Anakin followed closely behind, saber carving wide arcs through advancing droid units. Behind them, Ahsoka darted between broken cargo crates and shattered walls, using the Force to break off pieces of the wall and bring them down on the droids. Plo Koon arrived from the side, cutting down a couple of Magna Guards with quick swings of his saber. Grievous was climbing on top of the ceiling now, and he descended from above to land in the center of the Jedi. His forearms split, igniting his blades, and his first strikes were aimed at Obi-Wan. The two fought as they had many times before, Kenobi ducking, twisting, barely staying ahead of the 4 sabers. Anakin lunged from behind, but Grievous spun violently, locking sabers with both Jedi. Ahsoka leapt in from the side, landing a solid kick that staggered Grievous for a moment, long enough for Plo Koon to drive his saber deep into Grievous' shoulder. But even wounded, the general shrieked in rage, lashing out with his many limbs, sweeping them all back with a spin of energy. Ahsoka pointed up to the wall that she had already begun to break, and all 4 Jedi reached up, pulling the rest of it down. Grievous was forced to drop and run away like a spider, but Plo reached out, cutting through one of his legs. Grievous stumbled, and before he could recover, Obi-Wan spun his blade, stabbing it through the mechanical spine of Grievous, ending him here and now. All 4 Jedi breathed heavily as it was finally over. And on Coruscant, Yoda and Mace Windu sat in uneasy silence. Reports of Grievous' disappearance on Oba Diah were extremely disturbing. Before Obi-Wan was dispatched, Yoda had confided the mission's route and timing only to the Chancellor and his advisors. Yet Grievous had been there at the exact moment. There was only one explanation that made sense. Someone close to the Chancellor, or perhaps the Chancellor himself, was feeding Sidious information. It wasn't any proof of his identity, but it was the first fracture in the mask that the Sith Lord had been wearing for a decade. Each leaked mission, each ambush that followed, could not be coincidence. The Jedi, once reluctant to challenge the political structure of the Republic, could no longer afford this patience. The Council would open lines of communication with a growing group of dissenters in the Senate, leaders who'd begun to question Palpatine's ever-expanding powers. Among them was Padme Amidala, who'd grown very wary of Palpatine's time in office, along with Bail Organa and Mon Mothma. The Jedi would share their findings of this disturbing pattern of ambushes tied to Palpatine's most confidential briefings. The senators would begin to align themselves under a truth. The Republic was no longer under threat from the Separatists alone. The enemy was inside their own government. And with the death of Grievous on Oba Diah, the war should have come to an immediate end. With Dooku dead and now Grievous gone, the Confederacy had no remaining central command for pushing this war forward. The Republic's enemies were fractured, fleets retreating, supply lines collapsing. This, by all logic, should have been the moment to begin negotiations for peace. But Palpatine, instead of welcoming a new era, called for additional military funding and more emergency powers to pursue these hidden separatist threats. He claimed they still pose a danger and that they must be completely wiped out. This decision marked a final breach as Bail Organa would formally call for a vote of no confidence in Palpatine. The motion gained traction as more senators recognized that their democracy was twisting into a military state. When the vote passed, the Senate chamber fell into a silence. Palpatine was removed from office by constitutional means, but by then, he was already gone. He didn't protest or address the chamber. His office was cleared, and public schedules were vanishing. He was gone, but the Jedi were watching him extremely closely. The vote of no confidence was supposed to push Palpatine into a panic, where he might finally slip, and he did. Yoda and Windu tracked Palpatine deep into the industrial sector, and into an old building where the final battle would take place. As Yoda and Windu entered the building, Sidious had grown impatient. His sabers hissed to life, bathing the chamber in red light. Windu would move in at him first, striking at Sidious with quick strikes as he tried to gauge how this duel may go. The Sith Lord responded with a flurry of his own spins, using both blades, forcing Windu into a rapid retreat across the narrow walkways as Yoda now sprang out from above, flipping and twisting, catching Sidious mid-attack, sending the three warriors into a fight. The small Jedi Master fought with more power than anyone could predict from his size, as he flipped all around the walls, the ceiling, broken railings. He turned the environment into part of his assault, striking at Sidious with surprise angles and crushing pressure as he threw objects down at the Sith Lord. Sidious twisted, and he locked blades with both Jedi. Sabers crossed against Yoda's green and Windu's purple, teeth bared in feral anger as sparks flew around them. But as the fight dragged on, it became clear he was trying to separate them. A surge of lightning did break them apart, flinging Yoda high into the rafters and leaving Windu alone to face the Sith Lord. Windu fought well, saber a blur of purple energy, deflecting blow after blow until Yoda returned with a brutal downward strike that nearly disarmed Sidious. Sidious unleashed another wave of force power, collapsing part of the ceiling. The Jedi dodged, but Yoda landed hard as Sidious pressed, hurling his saber like a spear toward Windu's exposed side. But in that moment, Yoda used his final burst of strength to dive between them. The blade struck deep into his chest. Time froze for a moment. Yoda looked to Windu for a fraction of a second before collapsing, the weapon still buried in his chest. And a surge of pure focus would ignite in Windu as he met Sidious head on. Every step and every strike was deliberate. His saber was carving through Sidious's remaining blade, severing his hand, and then finally severing his life. The Sith Lord fell to the floor with the sound like the end of an empire. Windu stood above him, alone. The Grand Master was gone, but the darkness would be silenced. In the weeks that followed, the Senate would convene in a series of emergency sessions, and without Palpatine clouding their judgment, they would elect Bail Organa as the new Chancellor, a man respected across party lines for his compassion, rationality, loyalty to democracy. Emergency powers were immediately rescinded, and the Senate began the process of truly ending the war. The Jedi Council was humbled by their blindness during the conflict, shaken by the loss of Yoda, and they would choose Windu as their new Grand Master. Windu was deeply scarred by the war and by Yoda's death, but he accepted, determined to restore the Jedi to what they were meant to be. Anakin Skywalker would step back from the front lines to live openly as Padme's husband, though he remained within the Order in a less traditional capacity, working with displaced systems from the war, helping these worlds to rebuild alongside Padme and other senators. Obi-Wan became a leading voice in the Order's reform, taking Windu's place as Windu took Yoda's place. And Ahsoka, without the temple ever being bombed thanks to Barriss seeing it was not the Jedi that continued the war this time, would become a Jedi Knight when it was wrapped up. The clone troopers were honored as heroes and offered freedom and citizenship, with many settling across liberated systems as peacekeepers, guardians, or as people finally just allowed to choose who they wanted to be. And across the galaxy, there was no more marching of the boots of war or hum of warships above them. There was only rebuilding in the peace without war. And folks, that is our story for today. I just had this idea when I remembered the episode where Anakin, in Yoda's vision, kills Dooku, and I was like, hey, what if that actually happened during the war? So yeah, that was what this was based on, pretty much, and I wanted it to essentially wrap up with the impact of Dooku's, death being felt in one of the Clone Wars arcs where Dooku was most vital, helping to keep the Pikes and everyone from basically learning the truth. So, yeah. Hope you guys enjoyed. Let me know what you thought about this one. And thanks. I'll see you in the next video.